Good afternoon. Oh, I'm a bit loud there. It's a privilege for me to be standing in front of you today, and I'm particularly grateful to everybody for allowing me this stage to do so. I've been making a nuisance of myself in the UK in respect of the developing crisis in the British foal crop for the past 3 years. And it now seems that I can become equally unpopular globally in that same respect. Somebody said to me earlier outside, oh, it's you, are you going to be doom and gloom? Well, I'm not going to be doom and gloom. What I'm going to try and do in this short time that I've got in front of you is to present you with the facts, to present you with how those facts are influencing the British racing and breeding industry, making some suggestions about how we're going to deal with them, and in fact introducing you to a number of initiatives that we've got currently running, and then to convince you, finally, that it doesn't matter what we do in Britain, that this is a global problem and it needs a global solution, and that this runs from top to bottom. To deal with a problem must be accepted in the first place as a problem. And in Jim Lovell's words, Houston, we've got a problem, when he was aboard Apollo 13 in 1970, that could equally apply to our global thoroughbred breeding industry. The headline is, and that you've had this emphasised to you over the last 3 days, that in 20 short years, the global foal crop has fallen by 36%, from 125,000 to 80,000. Almost all breeding nations, and I call them the nursery nations, and you'll see them identified there on the slide, are seeing the same issue. And this is critical to the global industry, as we're all, as I said earlier, interdependent upon each other. For example, Hong Kong takes significant numbers of horses from Australia and Europe to deliver its racing programme. Ireland sells 60% of its output into the UK for the UK racing programme. And then the UK holds, in October, the biggest horses in training sale in the world every October, where over 50 nations buy product. There is the interdependency. I could continue to draw a thread through almost every racing jurisdiction that will connect this reliance. Of course, there are outliers. Japan is one, and France perhaps, but a little more about France later on. They're both good examples, and both of them demonstrate, and something that I'll come to again later, that intervention and incentive work and are essential to the future of our industry. But we'll all be affected ultimately by this continuing decline, and not just from a numbers perspective. Genetic compromise, and I'm going to deal with that, and diversity of product. I get thrown rocks at me in England when I say that if the racing industry wants red, blue, green and yellow horses, and they want red, blue, green and yellow horses in the following numbers, then it's the breeding industry's job to deliver those. And that diversity of product and the genetic of compromise, they're a very big card in this game of poker that racing and breeding is committed to. The drop in the foal crop is not immediately affected in the racing programme. I have to say that when I started this prep for today, and I've been doing it for a bit, I thought demand was fast outstripping supply, and that was because of new racing jurisdictions coming on board. They were growing faster and increasing the racing programme, and that isn't the case. You can see that races have fallen by 13%, and quality races by almost 1/5, but group races have accelerated there. And so that it demonstrates that elite product has a very high currency. The key number here is the big nursery nations are falling faster than the retracting supply base and demand requires. And the numbers very soon between demand and supply are going to be stark and have real consequences on the international racing program. We're all experiencing these same issues. Welfare has been talked about at length this morning, and that we know that that is an issue, and social license, more so in some nations than others, but eventually it'll trickle down. Don't be surprised at that. Genetic compromise. As the herd gets smaller, the consequences on that herd are going to be significant. The global foal crop trends cast doubt on the sustainability and economic viability of the supply chain. And that this is a big one for me, that racing hasn't attracted external investment to the extent that other sports have. We've fallen behind. Why isn't racing an international franchise the same as the NFL, the Premier League, the NBA, and the IPL? I mean, the IPL, the Cricket League, is relatively young, and it's outstripped us in every representation. From an external perspective, the betting landscape is more crowded than ever, and I'll demonstrate that on the next slide. Tightening legislation, particularly so in Great Britain, is pushing punters to this unregulated black market, and everywhere else as well, I might say. We're all concerned with it, we're all worried about it, and what can we do about it? And the consumption habits and conversion of the younger population to get them to engage with our racing product and our wonderful racing industry is a challenge that we're all facing. And of course, at the end of the day, cost base isn't retreating either. And so that the returns that we want and the margins that are being delivered are being eroded all of the time. I said just a minute ago that I'd give you an example of this as far of betting erosion as far as Britain is concerned. At the millennium, Britain had 90% of the betting market. We were the betting product of choice. In 25 years, that has been eroded away, and that we now are behind football, that has 44% of the market. 42% of the market is still racing, but we're not growing it, and so our income is under significant threat. And behind that, tennis, golf, and boxing are all making big strides as a betting proposition. Horse racing was the betting medium, and that today we're no longer the betting product of choice. Certainly that holds good in the UK. I wouldn't presume to stand in front of you and talk about other breeding and racing nations in detail. I have a general knowledge, but I thought you'd find it useful for me to discuss Britain's range of issues, which I know some of these issues will land with other jurisdictions. We've an expression in the UK, if the cat fits, wear it. And I'm certain many in this room will recognise the headgear that we're talking about here. Britain faces very difficult times with the challenge of betting attraction, coming back to the welfare, genetic compromise, and most of all, a compelling, attractive racing product. There's no guarantee that we can find the golden key for a sustainable future. Already the foal crop losses are being reflected in our competitive and compelling, attractive racing proposition. 40% of our races fail the 8-runner test. And that it's 8 runners or more that our turnover model, and I'll come back to the turnover model, depends upon to generate optimum revenue. We haven't got enough money to attract runners from overseas, and that takes away the consumer attraction. I've talked about attracting the under 30s, but more concerning is the demographic that we currently have, the over 45s, are leaving the premises. And I said legislative changes don't help us at all because our government pays, to a certain extent, lip service on the importance of the industry. We have 2 issues that are not electable. One is welfare, and the other is betting. And finally, the model that we've got doesn't work. And it doesn't work. It's a contradiction in terms to a foal crop that is falling and lack of product, and a turnover-driven model that depends on a high number of races being staged and race meetings being staged to generate the turnover. Here's something else that has been touched upon earlier, and it shows you the economics of breeding in the UK. This is my responsibility of chairman of the British Thoroughbred Breeders Association. And what I can say for certain that is in terms of understanding the problem, our TBA is on top of the case. For the past 12 years, at 4 yearly intervals, we've engaged with PwC, the major international consultancy practice, and it was a big squeeze for us to do so, to pay a significant amount of money for them to deliver economic impact studies on the British breeding industry. They have provided us with the blueprint. The first one gave us the database, the second one started to identify trends, and the third one, which was delivered in 2022, looked at the sensitivities of the industry. British racing product is driven by 2 sources, owner breeders and the commercial market, and they breed for 2 different initial outcomes. One wants to breed a racehorse, and the other a sales horse, and that can be quite different. To make this point, a quick look at our Group 1 races, and you'll see that the majority are won by the owner breeders. But since 2020, we've seen 12% of owner breeders leave the industry, and that when you see our foal crop numbers very shortly, they are almost the reflection upon the loss that we've had in the foal crop. This is then the commercial market. 3 out of 4 yearlings that went through the sales ring in 2024 failed to recover their cost. The median earnings on yearlings sold, you can see, are very different indeed. The filly increase over the colts, to a great extent, has something to do with an initiative, an intervention and incentive scheme that we've introduced that I'll discuss shortly. But here is the thing that terrified me, and it does terrify me every night when I think about it. 5% of the total yearlings sold in the UK in 2024, that's 121 yearlings out of 2,242 that were offered and sold, represented 40% of the total market. The market is so polarized at the top end. The high rollers and the high stakes winners for these represent profit for the breeder. But 95% of the industry, the breeders, are losing money. Our foal crop has seen the decline in the owner breeder, and that continues. But we're now about to see a correction in the commercial market. Just examine that slide and it will show you how absolutely precarious the British breeding industry is at a point. So here are the steady decline that is now beginning to accelerate. My view is that by 2027, our foal crop will have fallen by 25%, from 4,500 to 3,500. And there is no indication that there's a floor in sight. All the anecdotal evidence that we see suggests the breeding base is under the most severe pressure. And with it comes the further challenge upon the genetic profile, inability to influence diversity, the red, blue, green and yellow horses that I referred to, and the failure to provide the quality horses and quantity of horses to fulfill a reduced racing programme, let alone the number of fixtures that we currently stage. A major racecourse executive said to me, the foal crop issues won't affect us, of course, will they? Well, they will. If you take, and that this is broad brush stuff, and I accept it's broad brush stuff, so please, as I said, don't join people throwing rocks, that if out of a foal crop of 4,500, you get 20% of, in inverted commas, elite horses. That's 900 horses. Take it down to 3,500, that's 700 horses. That's 200 horses less available for the festivals and the big meetings. We have to find a way to stem this. But with it, it brings its own considerable problems. Because the foal crop is falling, the size of the herd is falling, the size of the opportunity is falling, and the size of the ability to invest in stallions disappears. We've gone from 354 stallions down to 107 currently. And that 107, you can put inverted commas around, there are, of the stallions that receive significant patronage, that's around about 92. If you recognise and add this to the foal crop numbers, you'll see that the broodmare band has been falling backwards. The stallions are falling backwards, and that, as Jim Lovell said, we've got a problem. And that this is a worrying trajectory, because 3 years ago, the TBA recognised the issue, and we instructed Nottingham University to provide a first look at where we were on the genetic journey of compromise. We can and we are doing something about this, but it's a fact that in any closed breeding community, inbreeding is an issue. And as that population falls, the problem intensifies. Inbreeding coefficient is a term that tells you how likely it is that an animal inherits the same gene from both parents because they share their ancestors. Low or zero is good. Anything over 4% should start ringing alarm bells. We're not there yet, but I think that the black line is accelerating fast. And that in my terms, if you did on a scale of 1 to 10, with 0 not being any sort of problem whatsoever, and 10 being we're joining the dodo, we're certainly at 5, we're probably at 6, and we're accelerating towards 7. And that curve is going to accelerate much faster because at the base in 1960, we had a much bigger broodmare band, we had a much bigger herd. So what are we doing? SPARKS. It's an acronym for a software program called Single Population Analysis and Records Keeping System. What we did last year is that we researched rare breeds that had been brought back from breeding population difficulties in Britain. And we found that the Cleveland Bay, a native breed of horse, had performed a remarkable resurgence. They had almost been brought back from the brink of extinction. And it was they, with a software company, that developed this SPARKS program. We've acquired a license for it. And this year, we're conducting a limited trial with around 500 British-based mares. The slide will tell what it will consider mean kinship. This simply means a measure for how common or rare an animal's genes are, and that then allows guidance upon future matings. Undoubtedly, there are going to be outcomes from this trial. And without prejudging the traffic lights give an idea of where we might be heading. Green are go mating, orange think about it, red are negative. There's going to be resistance. Of course there is, because there's commercial interests here. There will be imposition, I suspect, ultimately, and there will be responsibilities that the global breeding industry must take if it is to secure the future of the thoroughbred. If you just refer to the 36% loss in the global foal crop, you'll see the boat that we're all in. What we will be doing, once we have completed this study and been able to analyse its outcomes, is make it available globally. It's no good us just doing this on our own. We've got to do it together. I talked about the fillies earlier, and that this is a proof positive of an intervention and incentive scheme that works. It's been concentrated due to funding restrictions, and money is a very important thing as far as Britain is concerned, upon an encouragement to breed, buy, race and retain British bred fillies. It uses about 7% of the total government allocation of prize money, and that's about 5 million quid that we use a year, and it's been an outstanding success. We've been running it for 5 years. Registration rates are around 83%, and with the balance either exported or unviable, and has halved the difference in a value between a colt and a filly. Interestingly, it's had a positive side effect too, because traceability is a very important issue and a growing issue as far as the thoroughbred is concerned. Certainly in Britain, we recognise that we are moving towards full traceability of the thoroughbred. The agricultural industry in Britain has full traceability of every sheep, cow and pig, and it's unthinkable that the thoroughbred industry, which is perceived as a rich man's sport, cannot track the product that it produces from cradle to grave. GBB has given us the opportunity to track all of the filly population. We know where they are, we know who owns them, and we know what they're doing for the first stage of their career. And it's an important move forward as far as delivering a full traceability initiative. Is it enough? No, it's not. But it demonstrates what intervention and incentive can achieve. French breeders' premiums have done the same. Kentucky and New York breds, as well as Vobis Australia and similar schemes in Japan and so on, show. For my money, if we are to find a road out of this crisis, then it's going to be by persuasion and not direct imposition, and underpinning the breeding industry by incentivising performance-relating reward basis has to be the way forward. I talked earlier about the need for a transformational funding in Britain, and that this is another stem of work that we've been doing. We both don't have enough income to generate significant levels of prize money to make the industry investable, and that's not just investable by investors with cash, it's in people investing their careers in the industry. We have to make this a viable, attractive industry for people to want to come and work with us and be with us for the whole of the journey. Project PACE and Project Beacon are two initiatives that have been running. Beacon deals with the domestic market, and I have led Project PACE, which is the one that looks at an international opportunity and offer. The Football Premier League has been our example, and that on my steering group, Richard Scudamore, who built the Premier League, the Football Premier League, from very small beginnings to the behemoth that it is today. I could spend an hour talking to you about it, but in short, it takes the 25 elite fixtures that we have in Britain and sells these globally as a package. Any product today that's launched must have global appeal. To rely upon a domestic market is a high-risk strategy, and it's bound to fail. The neat thing about this is that if and when, and it is probably not if, it's just a question of when, we get together and form an international racing programme that runs throughout the year with elite fixtures that we can leverage to a completely new audience. This fits directly into it. It's not to say that the domestic market should be ignored, and Project Beacon is addressing that. But to give you just two headlines about engaging a new audience, certainly in Britain, Generation Z and the Millennials rate British racing as 18th on their list of an attractive sport to be involved with, and their principal concern about horse racing is welfare. That's the negative. The positive is that there is very clear evidence that there is a global audience and global attention on an international elite racing product. Worldpool has made great strides in that. The Breeders' Cup demonstrates it, and the numbers that Churchill Downs demonstrate for the Kentucky Derby just underline that. The final thing that we're doing, and this is very ambitious, and I accept that it's ambitious, but I'm going to come back to my red, blue, green and yellow horses. There is no industry of consequence in this world that doesn't have a reliable strategy and delivery of a supply line. And so what we are going to set out to do this year at the TBA is to deliver a 10 to 20 year breeding strategy. As I said, that all successful industries have strategies to ensure future product line. And if this industry is to succeed, we must rely upon it. The consumer expects the high quality product. We've got to deliver the high quality product. Failure to do so, to me, risks continued reduction and retraction in the race programme. We think that incentivising and managing that production should be right. We need to have levers so that we know so that we can ask the breeding industry to produce. Come back to the red, blue, green and yellow, and that divide those red, blue, green and yellows into distances and type of horse that are being bred. If we're getting too many red, then we can switch off the incentive. If we want more blue, we can switch on the incentive, and so on. And a coherent people strategy alongside that cannot be overlooked, because it's a truism to say no horses, no racing, but if we've got no people, we can't deliver racing either. And we want to start working on quality and quantity. As I said, the last pillar in that is my red, blue, green and yellow horses. And I do get in a lot of trouble at home by saying so. And if I've offended anybody with that reference here today, I'm sorry, but I am a retailer that has just moved into, well, not moved into, I've been in breeding racehorses for 40 odd years, but it's an industry I care hugely about. So, this is the final thing, and this is the most important part of my presentation. I want you to go away from here today recognising that it doesn't matter what any racing jurisdiction is doing in isolation, unless we get together and we solve these problems together, we will be going nowhere. Everything that Britain is doing is good enough for Britain, but it's not good enough for the international community unless we can work together. We need to work on this international racing programme. We need to be a major franchise. We need to be talked about in the same terms as the NFL, the NBA, the IPL. We need to have that same degree of attraction. We will then attract the younger audiences that we so crave. We need new income streams. I make no apology for telling you that Britain is suffering significantly from lack of funds. Not only do we need a new income stream, and we've got to find it, and that is what Project PACE is designed to do, but we also need capital. We need capital to restructure our industry. We are going to have to restructure our industry from a volume-driven model to a margin-driven model, and that's going to take time to do it. We also need to fund traceability, we need to fund welfare, we need to fund significant capital projects that can only come with a completely new look at the way that Britain finds its funding. I would suggest to you that we need to recognise and support and develop the nursery nations. That's not to say that other nations can't develop a breeding industry, but what we've got currently, we rely on for our product supply. We must ensure that that remains. We should develop a common welfare strategy, and I was heartened here this morning to listen to the road that is being travelled. And this genetic diversity, again, you know, that we've all got separate herds, but we need to understand the interreaction between those separate herds and how we are going to protect them and protect the overall thoroughbred herd. And that if Britain can deliver a coherent breeding strategy, maybe that would be an idea that the whole of the global racing world can follow. If we all knew what we were doing, if the right arm knew what the left arm was doing, we'd be able to move further and faster. I'm passionate about this. I'm passionate about this industry. I think that we are approaching a point of no return, certainly on foal crops, that we've got to get a handle on it. And it's no good saying it will be all right on the night. It won't unless we take our responsibility of the legacy that was given to us by the great thoroughbred and ensure its continuance, health and strength. Thank you very much.